Amara Johnson had just stepped off the plane from London, her body sore from the long flight, her mind exhausted from the whirlwind week spent on her study trip. At 17, she was more than capable of handling herself, but after hours of traveling, all she wanted to do was grab her bag, breeze through customs, and get home to her family. She missed her little brother, missed her mom's cooking, and, most of all, missed the comfort of her own bed. But this homecoming wasn't going to be as easy as she imagined. As she walked toward the baggage claim area of the airport, her eyes skimmed over the sea of travelers around her. The buzz of the airport, the dull murmur of voices, the whirring of luggage belts, and the sharp calls for last-minute gate changes, felt oddly soothing after the chaos of her week abroad. She felt the weight of her backpack shift with each step, the familiar ache of jet lag settling deep into her bones. Amara wasn't in a rush, but she kept an eye on her watch. She had a car service waiting for her outside, but there was time. She still had a good 30 minutes before the car arrived. It was when she approached the security checkpoint that things took a strange turn. A man in his late 30s, dressed in a crisp airline pilot uniform, suddenly stepped into her path. He was tall, with a clean-cut face and a stern expression that immediately caught her off guard. He stood there for a moment, arms crossed, as if he was trying to decide whether or not to speak. Amara's brow furrowed. She had no idea who this man was, nor did she understand why he was standing in her way. "Excuse me," Amara said, her voice polite but confused. "Can I help you?" The pilot's gaze lingered on her for a moment, sizing her up. Then, he took a deep breath and spoke, his voice cold and commanding. "You need to leave the security area immediately." Amara blinked, taken aback. "What?" "I'm just trying to get to baggage claim." The pilot stepped closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You need to leave now. You're not allowed here." Amara, still unsure of what was happening, glanced around. There were no security officers in sight, and the few other passengers passing by seemed oblivious to the interaction. "I don't understand," she said, her voice shaky now. "I'm just going to pick up my bags. I'm not doing anything wrong." The man didn't seem interested in hearing her explanation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers tapping rapidly across the screen. "I'm calling security," he said flatly. "You're causing a disturbance, and I can't have that." Amara's heart raced. The confusion quickly turned to frustration. She couldn't believe this was happening. Why was he treating her this way? What had she done? As her thoughts spiraled, she took a step back, glancing around again, but no one seemed to be noticing. It felt surreal, like she was in a bad dream. The pilot stepped aside, still staring at her, but his eyes never left her. His attention had shifted from her to his phone, typing a message that would, in moments, pull the police into this seemingly trivial matter. For a brief moment, Amara considered her options. She could turn around, leave the area, and head straight to baggage claim, but something in her gut told her that wouldn't resolve anything. She couldn't let herself be intimidated, not when she knew she had done nothing wrong. Before she could even open her mouth to protest further, she heard the all-too-familiar sound of a police officer's radio crackling nearby. Her pulse quickened. "Amara Johnson." The officer's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, and the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. How did they already know her name? The officer approached, scanning the situation before looking down at her ID. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes flicking between Amara and the pilot. "I don't know," Amara said, the frustration in her voice bubbling to the surface. "This man told me to leave the security area and then called you." The officer didn't reply immediately. He glanced at the pilot, who had now straightened up, his posture rigid. The officer then looked back at Amara, sizing her up in a way that made her stomach twist. "Miss, you'll need to come with me," the officer said finally, his voice carrying an undertone of finality. Amara could feel her throat tighten, panic beginning to creep up on her. This wasn't supposed to be happening. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't doing anything wrong. And yet, here she was, being questioned by the police in the middle of an airport with no idea why. Just as the officer reached out to take her arm, Amara's thoughts raced. She had to do something, anything, to get out of this mess. Her heart was pounding now, and she could feel the weight of the eyes around her. She had to call her dad. There was no other choice. As the officer turned to speak to the pilot, Amara quickly pulled out her phone and typed a message to her father. "Dad, I need you to come to the airport. Something's happening, and I don't know what to do." It only took a second for her to hit send, but it felt like an eternity. As she waited for a response, Amara's mind swirled with thoughts of how this could have happened. She couldn't help but wonder, what had she done to deserve this? What was it about her, her skin, her presence, that made people like the pilot treat her like she didn't belong? In those few moments, time seemed to stretch on endlessly. The officer's voice grew more distant, but Amara couldn't focus on anything except the one thought that kept repeating in her mind: this isn't fair. Finally, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from her dad. "I'm on my way. Stay calm. Don't let them push you around." Amara breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better once her dad arrived. But little did she know, things were about to take a sharp turn, one that would change everything. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Amara Johnson had always felt like an outsider. Not in a way that made her feel completely out of place, but in a quiet, lingering sort of way, like she was always just a little bit different from everyone else, even within her own family. And it wasn't because of her interests or hobbies, nor because she had the type of personality that clashed with her peers. No, it was the way people saw her. It was how they perceived her, based solely on the color of her skin. Growing up in a family that worked in aviation was a dream for some, but not always for Amara. Her father, Dr. Michael Johnson, was an important figure in the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. As an administrator overseeing air traffic safety and policy development, his job wasn't just a career, it was a lifelong dedication. It had taken him years of relentless hard work to get to where he was, and it wasn't an easy path for him either. Amara respected her father immensely, but she had never been able to fully connect with him. Their relationship was strained in ways she couldn't articulate, though she suspected part of it stemmed from her own struggle to feel like she truly fit into his world. Her mom, Elaine Johnson, was more down to earth. She worked as a teacher and was always there for Amara when things got tough, offering support in ways that felt warm and personal. But even though her mom was the softer influence, Amara often found herself wishing her father would open up to her more, just once, to see her for who she was, not just as the daughter of a powerful figure. She'd been raised with high expectations, but something about the rigid, unspoken rules of her family always made her feel like she had to measure up to an impossible standard. On her study trip to London, she'd begun to feel a sense of independence, of finding her own voice and identity apart from her father's shadow. She was excelling in her studies and growing in confidence, but that didn't change the fact that her dad was still unreachable in a way. He never seemed to understand her, never seemed to notice that she was trying to carve out her own space. He was too busy to be involved in the details of her life, too absorbed in his career to fully acknowledge her struggles or the changes she was going through. Still, despite the emotional distance, Amara admired her father's achievements. She understood that the work he did was crucial to the safety of countless people every day, and she was proud of him. But there was a part of her that longed to have a deeper connection, one that wasn't always about his reputation or his authority. For Amara, this trip to London had been a small step toward independence, a journey that was supposed to teach her something about herself. Yet, as she stood in the airport, facing the unprovoked hostility of the pilot who'd called the police on her, she realized just how much she still struggled with being seen for who she truly was, not just as a reflection of her father's status. The feeling of being dismissed, of being treated with suspicion for reasons beyond her control, was one she had faced time and time again, especially in the world of aviation. Her father's colleagues and peers often acted as if she was nothing more than an accessory to his career. She'd been invited to events, sure, but it was always clear that she wasn't the main focus. It wasn't her own accomplishments they were interested in, it was her father's reputation, the legacy he was building. Sometimes it felt as if her presence was nothing more than an afterthought. The moment that pilot had stepped into her path in the airport had triggered a wave of memories of times when she had been treated unfairly simply because of her race, memories of being underestimated or judged based on something beyond her control. It was an experience all too familiar, but one that she had hoped to leave behind in the past. That's why she was frustrated, not just because the pilot was acting so aggressively toward her, but because it was yet another reminder that despite all her efforts to move beyond her father's shadow, she would always be seen first as a black woman in a world that wasn't always kind to people like her. As she stood there, trying to stay calm, she knew she couldn't stay silent this time. She couldn't let this moment pass without standing up for herself, for the dignity that she deserved as a person, not just as someone's daughter. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding at the airport. It was about a pattern, a system that treated people like her with suspicion, that saw her as a threat when she had done nothing to deserve it. Her mind raced as she clutched her phone, waiting for her father's reply. She could feel her pulse quicken as she thought about what would happen next. Her father wasn't just any bureaucrat in the FAA, he was a powerful administrator, a man whose work affected millions of people. He could change the course of this entire situation with just one phone call. And yet, part of her hesitated. She was determined to handle things on her own. She didn't want to always rely on her father's position to get her out of trouble. But deep down, she knew that her dad had the power to turn the tide. And, for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her father's career come to her aid, not as a shadow over her, but as a tool for justice. As Amara waited for her father's response, the scene around her seemed to slow down. She could hear the murmurs of passengers in the background, the low hum of the airport's overhead speakers, and the rhythmic footsteps of security personnel pacing nearby. Everything felt surreal, like she was stuck in a moment that wasn't supposed to be happening. And then her phone buzzed. Her dad's name flashed on the screen. "I'm on my way. Stay calm. Don't let them push you around." A wave of relief washed over Amara. For a moment, she could breathe. She wasn't alone in this. Her dad was coming, he would fix this. And maybe, just maybe, he'd finally understand that she wasn't just his daughter. She was Amara Johnson, someone with her own voice, her own story. She didn't need to be invisible any longer. As the officers continued their conversation with the pilot, Amara stood there, rooted in place, quietly summoning all her courage. There was no turning back now. She wasn't going to let this man, this pilot, get away with treating her like she didn't matter. When her father arrived, everything was about to change. The minutes stretched long and heavy as Amara stood in place, waiting for her dad. She could feel her heart thudding in her chest, the adrenaline coursing through her veins, but also the deep well of uncertainty that kept nagging at her. The officer was still conversing with the pilot, but Amara could barely hear their words through the haze of her own thoughts. Her gaze flickered around the terminal, trying to gauge the reactions of other travelers. Some people were pretending not to notice, their eyes fixed on their phones or luggage. Others shot quick glances in her direction, either with curiosity or pity, though Amara couldn't decide which one felt worse. The officer, a tall man with short-cropped hair and a stern face, was still speaking with the pilot, his voice low, though she could catch a few snatches of their conversation. The words, disturbance, and suspicious behavior, stood out, and Amara felt the blood rush to her face. Her chest tightened in anger. How could anyone think she was a threat? She had been standing in line like everyone else. This was ridiculous. A cold wave of humiliation washed over her. The unjust feeling of being singled out because of her skin felt like a familiar burden she had carried her entire life. It wasn't new, this feeling of being judged by someone who hadn't even taken the time to understand who she was. The casual discrimination, the subtle and not so subtle prejudice, it was all part of the world she lived in, one that constantly reminded her that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she tried to be seen for her talents, there was always this invisible wall she could never break through. Just as the officer began speaking to her again, her phone buzzed in her pocket. "I'm outside. Stay calm." Her dad. Her breath caught in her throat. Michael Johnson, the FAA administrator, the man whose name carried weight, the man who could make this nightmare end in an instant. She knew she couldn't rely on him forever. She'd always had to carve her own path, and if she was going to stand up for herself now, she would have to do it on her own first. But the idea of her dad arriving here, of the authority he wielded, made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Amara straightened her back, pushing the lump in her throat down. She was tired of being passive, of letting others define who she was. She could feel her anger bubbling up, the injustice of it all stirring a fire in her. The officer walked toward her again, his steps slow but purposeful. "Miss Johnson," he said, his tone even but carrying an edge of irritation. "I need you to stay with me while we sort this out. The pilot has claimed you were causing a disturbance." He gestured toward the pilot, who had his arms crossed and was glaring in her direction. She swallowed hard, her eyes locking with the officer's. "I wasn't causing any disturbance," she said firmly, trying to control the shake in her voice. "I was simply walking to baggage claim. I don't know why I'm being treated like this." The officer didn't respond right away, his expression unreadable. Amara could sense he was weighing his options, but there was something in his eyes that told her he wasn't entirely convinced by the pilot's story. He had to have known that the situation didn't add up. There were no cameras showing her causing any problems, no one else reporting her behavior. Just the pilot's word. It didn't seem right, but still, he had to follow procedure. As the officer hesitated, a loud voice interrupted the tense silence. "Amara." It was her father's voice. Strong, commanding, and unmistakable. Amara's heart leaped in her chest as she turned toward the sound. Her dad was walking toward her now, his long strides carrying him across the terminal with authority. He was dressed in a smart suit, his tie slightly loosened from a long day of meetings, but there was no mistaking the air of confidence he exuded. As soon as he reached her side, his eyes locked onto the officer, and Amara saw the man flinch slightly. "Sir, I believe you have something to explain," Michael Johnson said, his voice cold but even. "What exactly is going on here?" The officer straightened up, suddenly uncomfortable. "Mr. Johnson, this young lady is being questioned for." "I know who she is," Michael interrupted, his tone firm, cutting off the officer's words. "I'm her father. Now, I suggest you explain yourself." The officer stammered for a moment, unsure of how to respond to someone of Michael's stature. He glanced nervously at the pilot, who had remained silent, his arms still folded across his chest. Well, sir, it seems we've had a situation here involving a disturbance," the officer began again, but Michael was already shaking his head. "Disturbance?" Michael's voice raised slightly in disbelief. "You're calling a young woman walking to baggage claim a disturbance?" His eyes turned to the pilot, who now seemed to shrink under Michael's intense gaze. "And you are?" Jason Brooks stepped forward, his jaw tight, but he wasn't meeting Michael's gaze. "I'm Captain Jason Brooks. I'm with the airline, and I..." Michael cut him off again, this time looking at Amara. His expression softened as he turned to her, his gaze filled with concern. "Amara, are you okay?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been moments before. Amara nodded, grateful for her father's presence, though her frustration still simmered beneath the surface. "I'm fine, Dad. Just, confused." Turning back to the officer, Michael's voice took on a dangerous edge. "My daughter has done nothing wrong. If anyone's causing a disturbance here, it's this man." He pointed at Jason, his finger unwavering. The pilot's face reddened, but he remained silent. He had likely realized by now that he had overstepped, and Michael's authority had already begun to work its magic. The officer, however, was caught between a rock and a hard place. He knew who Michael Johnson was. The FAA administrator didn't just walk around unnoticed. "I suggest you reconsider your actions, officer," Michael said, his tone now almost chilling. "And I believe we'll need to get a full report on this." Amara could see the tension shift in the officer's posture. His shoulders dropped, and he nodded, glancing nervously between Michael and the pilot. "Of course, Mr. Johnson. I'll be sure to review the situation," the officer stammered. Michael nodded once, satisfied. He turned to Amara, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "We'll get this sorted, sweetheart. Don't worry," he said softly. Amara managed a small smile in return, but her mind was still racing. She wasn't sure what would happen next. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, this was the moment she'd been waiting for. A moment where she could prove that she wasn't just the daughter of an influential man. She was her own person, capable of standing up for herself, capable of making a change. But this was just the beginning. The conflict was far from over. Amara's heart was still racing as she stood beside her father, watching the scene unfold. The officer had already backed down, visibly shaken by Michael's intervention, but the tension still hung thick in the air. The pilot, Jason Brooks, remained stiff and silent, clearly regretting the call he'd made. He avoided eye contact with anyone, his gaze fixed on the floor as if he were trying to disappear into the sterile tiles of the airport terminal. Michael, however, didn't look at the pilot. Instead, he turned his attention to Amara, his face softening as he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said, his voice low but firm. "This should never have happened." Amara nodded, still processing what had just transpired. A part of her wanted to feel a sense of relief, that her dad had come to her rescue, but another part of her, the part that had always strived to be independent, felt uneasy. She didn't want to rely on her father's position to make things right. She wanted to be strong on her own, to prove that she didn't need anyone to fight her battles for her. But it was hard to ignore the weight of her father's presence. In that moment, standing beside him, she realized how much his career, and his power, could affect the course of her life. It wasn't just a matter of feeling safe, it was about the undeniable truth that her father had the ability to move mountains. And for the first time in years, Amara had to confront that reality. "Amara, let's get out of here," Michael said, his voice breaking through her thoughts. "I'll have a word with the airline. This will be dealt with." As they began to walk toward the exit, the weight of the incident seemed to slowly lift from Amara's shoulders. She could still feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, their gaze lingering with curiosity, perhaps even a touch of disbelief. But now, with her dad by her side, things didn't feel as daunting. It was as if the power of his position had shielded her from further judgment, from the uncomfortable stares that often followed her in public spaces. But something was different this time. Something had changed inside her. The trip to the airport had been meant to be a simple step toward independence, but it had turned into a reminder of just how far she had yet to go. She had spent her life trying to distance herself from her father's influence, from the shadows of his accomplishments. But now, as they walked through the terminal, Amara couldn't help but think about how intertwined their lives truly were. Her father's influence was inevitable, woven into the very fabric of her existence. He had spent decades working his way up in the FAA, and his position had opened doors, granted him respect, and earned him both admiration and fear. In many ways, Amara had grown up in the world of aviation, surrounded by the buzz of air traffic control towers, the hum of aircraft engines, and the constant hum of policy debates and safety measures. But it had never felt like her world. It had always felt like his world. And now, standing next to him, she was forced to confront the complexity of their relationship, the weight of their shared history, and the burden of being his daughter. "We need to talk," Michael said quietly as they reached the airport parking lot. But not here. Let's get to the car. Amara's stomach twisted. She knew this conversation was coming. Her father had always been a man of few words when it came to emotions, and whenever he wanted to talk seriously, it usually meant something important, something that couldn't be avoided. Once they were settled in the car, Michael started the engine and pulled out of the lot, the familiar sound of tires rolling on asphalt providing a steady backdrop to the tension building between them. Amara's hands gripped her phone tightly in her lap, her mind racing. "Amara," Michael began, his tone much softer now, "I need you to understand something. What happened today was wrong. And I'm going to make sure the airline takes responsibility. But you also need to realize that." "Dad, I don't need you to fix everything for me," Amara cut in, her voice shaky but firm. "I can handle myself. I've been handling myself for years. I don't need your position to get me out of trouble." Her father's grip on the steering wheel tightened for a moment, but he didn't say anything. Instead, he kept his eyes on the road, navigating the busy streets with practiced precision. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I know you can handle yourself," he finally said. "But sometimes, the world isn't going to give you that chance. You don't have the luxury of being treated the same as everyone else. And you should never have to fight for your dignity like you did today." Amara flinched at the words, feeling the sting of truth in them. She had always prided herself on being able to stand on her own 2 feet. But what her father was saying was undeniable. The world wasn't always going to see her for who she was. Sometimes, no matter how hard she worked, people would only see the color of her skin, and that would be the thing that shaped how they treated her. "I'm not asking you to fix it," Amara said quietly, her voice softer now. I want to be seen. As me. Not as the daughter of someone important." Michael exhaled sharply, his eyes softening as he glanced at her briefly before focusing on the road again. "I know. And I'm sorry for that. I've been so focused on my work, on everything I've built, that I never stopped to think about what you needed. You're not just my daughter, Amara. You're a person with your own voice, your own dreams. You deserve more than what I've given you." The words hit Amara harder than she expected. She had never heard her father speak so openly about his failures, especially not where she was concerned. It made her stomach twist with emotion, a mix of relief and sadness. "I don't need you to be perfect," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I just need you to see me. And not just for the stuff you want me to be." The car was silent for a moment, save for the sound of the tires against the pavement. Amara didn't know what to say next. Her mind was still processing the chaos of the day. But somewhere deep inside, she knew this moment was a turning point. Not just for her and her dad, but for how she would navigate the rest of her life. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding at an airport. This was about her understanding her place in the world, about coming to terms with who she was and what she had to do to survive and thrive in a world that often tried to diminish her. And as her father drove them through the streets, Amara felt a strange sense of clarity beginning to settle within her. The journey was just beginning. The challenges would be many. But with her father's support, and her own resilience, she was ready to face them head-on. And maybe, just maybe, she could change the course of her own story. The following days after the airport incident felt like a blur for Amara. She hadn't expected things to settle so quickly, especially after her father's intervention. The airline had issued a public apology, and the officer who had been involved had been reprimanded. The situation was officially closed, but Amara couldn't shake the feeling of having been both seen and invisible at the same time. She was grateful for her father's support, but that didn't erase the sting of the incident. And then, as if the universe were testing her, something happened that completely changed the course of the story. It was a Thursday afternoon when the call came in. Amara had been home alone, a rare quiet moment amidst her usually busy schedule. Her father was in Washington, D.C., attending a series of meetings, and her mom had gone out to run errands. The ringing phone shattered the silence. "Amara, it's Jason Brooks," the voice on the other end of the line said, instantly making Amara's stomach drop. Jason. The pilot. The man who had set all this in motion. She felt her palms go clammy as she leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to steady her breath. Jason. Why are you calling me? She asked, trying to keep the edge out of her voice, though it was impossible to completely mask her surprise and frustration. I owe you an apology. Jason's voice was surprisingly calm, his words deliberate. What happened at the airport was my fault. I didn't handle the situation properly, and I regret that. I've been thinking a lot about it, and I want to make things right. Amara stood frozen, unsure of what to say. Was this a genuine apology? Or was he just trying to cover his tracks after being called out for his actions? She didn't know how to feel, but something about the sincerity in his voice made her hesitate. I appreciate that, she replied, cautiously, but I'm not sure what you're expecting from me. You already got the airline to apologize, and I think that's where it should end. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Jason spoke again. I understand. But what I did to you wasn't just about the incident. It's bigger than that. I've been in this business for years, and I've seen how people like me, people who hold power, can make decisions that affect others in ways we don't always understand. I want to understand how it felt for you. I want to know what it's like to be on the other side. The words felt heavy, almost as if Jason had been carrying them for a long time. Amara wasn't sure how to respond. She had been so focused on what he had done to her, on the injustice of it all, that she hadn't considered what it must have been like for him. But that didn't mean she was ready to forgive him. Not yet. I don't know if you can understand, Amara said, her voice steady but low. Not unless you've been in my shoes. People don't think about the impact their actions have on someone like me until it's too late. There was another long pause before Jason spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. I know. I've never had to think about that before. And I'm sorry. I never should have judged you based on assumptions. Amara didn't know what to make of his words. She had always been taught that apologies were meant to be followed by action. But how could he fix something like this? Could he? Before she could respond, Jason added, I know this doesn't fix everything, but I want to do better. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet and talk more. I just want you to know that I'm truly sorry. Amara felt a wave of emotion flood over her. She was angry, yes. But there was also something else, something that tugged at her chest. The desire for reconciliation. The need for closure. She wasn't sure. But she knew that this was a crossroads, a point in her life where she would need to make a decision. I'll think about it, Amara said quietly, unsure of what her next move would be. She hung up the phone with mixed emotions swirling inside her. She didn't want to let Jason off the hook. She didn't want to make things easier for him just because he was apologizing. But at the same time, she knew that holding on to the anger and resentment would only weigh her down. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. Amara couldn't stop thinking about Jason's apology. Was it sincere? Could she truly forgive him for the way he treated her, for the humiliation he had put her through? She had talked to her father about the call, but Michael had remained cautious. Amara, you don't owe him anything. If you feel like meeting him will help you find closure, then do it. But don't feel pressured. It's okay to take your time. Amara appreciated her father's words, but deep down, she knew that closure wasn't just about forgiving Jason. It was about reclaiming her own sense of peace. It was about not allowing someone else's ignorance to define her. So, a week later, she agreed to meet Jason. She wasn't sure if it was the right decision, but she had a feeling that this encounter would be a turning point. The day of the meeting, Amara arrived early. She stood outside the coffee shop, her breath visible in the cool morning air. As the minutes ticked by, her anxiety mounted. Was she doing the right thing? Was she ready to face the man who had put her through so much emotional turmoil? She turned when she heard a voice calling her name. Amara. Jason was standing at the door of the coffee shop, looking almost like a different person. Gone was the arrogance from that day at the airport. Now, he looked nervous, almost apologetic. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. She gave him a curt nod but didn't speak immediately. Jason stepped closer, offering her a hesitant smile. "I know I don't deserve this," he said softly, "but I'm really glad you agreed to meet me." Amara took a deep breath, exhaling slowly before speaking. "Let's just sit down. We'll see where this goes." The conversation that followed was uncomfortable at first. They both fumbled through their words, unsure of how to bridge the gap that had formed between them. But as they continued to talk, something unexpected happened. Jason began to open up, revealing the struggles and biases he had grown up with, things that he had never had to question before. And Amara? She found herself listening, not just to his apology, but to his attempt at understanding. She wasn't sure if it would be enough, but in that moment, she realized something crucial: forgiveness wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about freeing herself from the weight of the anger that had held her captive. As they parted ways that morning, Amara couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. The burden wasn't fully gone, but it was lighter. And that was a start. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt the weight of the world on her shoulders grow just a little bit lighter. The emotional climax had passed, and though she wasn't sure what lay ahead, she was beginning to realize that her journey had only just begun. The weeks following her meeting with Jason were marked by a profound sense of change in Amara's life. She hadn't expected the encounter to be as transformative as it was. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was beginning to understand herself in a way she never had before. The weight of her past, of her father's expectations, of the airport incident, and the trauma she'd carried from countless other experiences, was beginning to lift, piece by piece. But it wasn't just about her personal growth. The more Amara reflected, the more she realized that her relationship with Jason, while important, was just one small part of a much larger story. The real shift had occurred inside her, in her ability to confront the complex layers of her identity, and in her willingness to take ownership of her own narrative. She spent several evenings writing in her journal, her thoughts flowing freely as she processed everything that had happened. The act of putting words to paper had always been her way of sorting through emotions, but now, it was more than just that. It was a way of making sense of the deeper, unspoken truths that had been simmering beneath the surface for so long. Amara had been angry at Jason, angry at the world, angry at herself for feeling powerless. But she realized now that forgiveness wasn't just about giving others a second chance, it was about reclaiming her own power, about choosing to rise above the bitterness that had once held her hostage. But the process of healing didn't come without its difficulties. There were still moments when Amara found herself slipping back into old habits, reverting to the version of herself who felt small, invisible, and unworthy. There were days when the weight of being judged based on the color of her skin still felt like a heavy burden. And there were still moments when her father's influence seemed more like a chain than a source of strength. One particularly difficult day, Amara found herself in her father's office. Michael had insisted she come visit him, and although she wasn't sure what to expect, she agreed. When she arrived, she found him buried in paperwork, his desk cluttered with reports and notes. But as soon as he saw her, his face softened, and he motioned for her to sit. "I've been thinking about you a lot, Amara," he said, his voice gruff yet sincere. "And about everything that's happened. I want to make sure you know that I'm proud of how you've handled things. I've always been proud of you, even if I don't always show it." Amara blinked, surprised by the vulnerability in her father's words. She had grown used to his stoic demeanor, to the way he kept his emotions locked away behind a mask of professionalism. But now, there was something different in his eyes. "I don't know if I've been the best father," Michael continued, leaning back in his chair. "I've spent so much of my life working to build my career, to provide for this family, that I forgot to look at what you needed. I didn't realize the pressure I was putting on you, or how much you were carrying on your own." Amara sat quietly, taking in his words. For years, she had resented her father for being so consumed by his work, for not being there when she needed him. But in that moment, she understood. He hadn't been absent out of malice, he had simply been too focused on providing for their future to realize the emotional toll it was taking on her. "I don't need you to be perfect, Dad," Amara said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I just need you to see me. To see who I am, not just as your daughter, but as my own person." Michael's expression softened, and for the first time, he looked truly remorseful. "I'm sorry, Amara. I've failed you in ways I can't fix with just words. But I want to do better. I want to be there for you in the way you deserve." The air between them was heavy with unspoken truths. But in that moment, Amara felt a shift. Her father was not perfect, but he was trying. And that, in itself, was enough to start rebuilding their relationship. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a step forward, a step toward healing. Later that evening, Amara sat in her room, reflecting on the conversation. It was the first time in a long time that she had allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to let go of the anger she had been holding onto for so long. And it felt freeing. As she looked out her window at the city below, a quiet sense of hope washed over her. It was a feeling she hadn't had in years. She realized that this was her life. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't easy. But it was hers, and she was learning to navigate it on her own terms. The road ahead would not be without its challenges. There would still be moments of doubt, moments of frustration, and moments when the weight of being misunderstood would feel suffocating. But Amara knew that she had the strength to face whatever came her way. She had survived the airport incident. She had learned to confront the biases of others, and more importantly, she had learned to confront her own insecurities. She was beginning to see herself for who she truly was, not just the daughter of a powerful FAA administrator, not just the girl who had been humiliated at the airport, but a young woman who was capable of forging her own path. And for the first time, Amara felt like she was truly starting to become the person she was meant to be. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear, the journey was far from over. There would be twists and turns, highs and lows, but she was ready to face it all. Because no matter how difficult life became, Amara knew that she had something more important than just her father's legacy, she had her own. And that was all she needed to move forward. With that thought, she closed her journal and smiled to herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt peace. And as she sat there, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point, she couldn't help but feel a quiet, powerful sense of anticipation for what was to come. Amara's life, though more peaceful now, was far from simple. After her heart-to-heart with her father, she felt like a new chapter had begun. The road ahead seemed clearer, more manageable. But, as often happens in life, the universe had a way of throwing curveballs at the most unexpected moments. It was a Friday evening when Amara received the email that would change everything. It was from an old high school friend, Rachel, someone who had drifted out of her life years ago after an argument that neither of them had ever truly resolved. The subject line read, "Can we talk?" Amara stared at the screen for a long moment. She hadn't heard from Rachel in over 2 years, not since that disastrous falling out at graduation. Back then, Rachel had called her out on some of the things she'd said about her own identity, things Amara had been too defensive to really hear. At the time, it had felt like a betrayal, a challenge to everything she had tried to believe about herself. But looking back now, Amara realized Rachel had been trying to push her toward something important, toward facing uncomfortable truths. Taking a deep breath, Amara clicked open the email. It read, "Amara. I know it's been a long time, and I understand if you don't want to hear from me. But I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I need to say something to you. Something I should have said a long time ago. Can we meet? Rachel." Amara stared at the message for a long while, her heart pounding. Her first instinct was to hit delete and move on with her life. But then something stopped her. She had spent so much of her life avoiding uncomfortable conversations, avoiding people who challenged her, avoiding confrontation that could potentially force her to grow. But she wasn't that person anymore. She had learned to face her fears and accept the discomfort that came with it. She had learned that healing required vulnerability. With a reluctant sigh, she typed a response. "I'm open to talking. When and where?" Within moments, Rachel responded. "How about Sunday at the park near your place? I'll be there at 2 p.m. Let me know if that works." It was a simple reply, but it carried weight. Amara felt a mix of curiosity and trepidation. She wasn't sure what Rachel had to say, but she knew this would be an important moment, one where she could either remain in her comfort zone or confront the past and see where it might lead. Sunday afternoon came faster than Amara expected. She stood by the park bench, trying to calm her nerves as she waited. The breeze was cool, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the ground. Her mind replayed all the memories of high school, the good, the bad, and the painful. It wasn't long before Rachel appeared, walking slowly toward her, her gaze uncertain. Rachel looked almost exactly the same as she had back then, her long, dark hair falling in soft waves, her posture tense but poised. When she saw Amara, their eyes met, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to fall away. "Hi," Rachel said softly, her voice quieter than Amara remembered. She smiled, but it was hesitant. "Hi," Amara replied, her own voice tight with anticipation. She felt a little awkward, unsure how to begin. There was so much between them that hadn't been said. So much that had been left unresolved. They both sat down on the park bench, the silence stretching between them like a chasm that neither knew how to cross. Finally, Rachel broke it. "I don't know where to start," she admitted, staring down at her hands. "I've thought about this conversation for years, but it's hard to know how to say what needs to be said." Amara waited, her eyes fixed on Rachel, her mind racing. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she had a feeling it had something to do with the way things ended between them. "I owe you an apology," Rachel continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I was wrong. I pushed you too hard, and I said things I didn't mean. I criticized you when all I really wanted was to help you see things differently. I was frustrated because I could see how much pain you were in, and I didn't know how to get through to you." Amara was silent, processing Rachel's words. She had always blamed Rachel for the fallout between them, but now, sitting across from her, Amara realized that part of the blame rested on her own shoulders. She had been defensive, unwilling to listen, unwilling to let anyone challenge her. She had felt vulnerable, and rather than face it, she had lashed out. "I was angry at you for not understanding me," Amara said, her voice quiet. "But I didn't understand you either. I couldn't see that you were trying to push me to look at things differently. I thought you were judging me, but you were just trying to make me realize something that I wasn't ready to face." Rachel's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I never meant to hurt you, Amara. I was just trying to get you to open up, to see beyond the walls you built around yourself. I know it wasn't my place, and I'm so sorry." Amara's heart softened as she listened to Rachel's apology. This wasn't just a, "I'm sorry," to make things better. This was a genuine expression of regret, of someone finally owning up to their part in the brokenness between them. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. "I'm sorry too," Amara whispered, looking down at her hands. "I was angry for so long. I pushed you away because I was afraid of being vulnerable. But I see now that I missed out on a lot by doing that." There was a long pause as both of them sat in the quiet, reflecting on the years lost. But in that silence, something was healing. Amara wasn't sure if they could ever fully fix the rift between them, but at least they were finally talking, finally understanding each other in a way they never had before. After a long while, Rachel smiled softly. "I don't expect things to go back to how they were. But I hope this is a step towards something better, something we can both learn from." Amara nodded. "I agree. I think it's time to stop running from things." They sat there for a while longer, talking about everything and nothing at all. But in that moment, Amara realized that forgiveness wasn't just about what others did, it was about releasing herself from the weight of resentment, from the fear of being misunderstood. And that, more than anything, would allow her to move forward. By the time they parted ways, the air between them felt lighter. The weight of old wounds had started to lift, and though the path ahead was still uncertain, Amara was beginning to understand that it was the small moments of vulnerability and reconciliation that ultimately paved the way for healing. She walked back home with a quiet smile on her face, a sense of peace settling over her. The world, it seemed, was full of unexpected tests, but it was in facing them head-on that Amara was truly beginning to find her strength. Amara's newfound sense of peace didn't last long. As much as she tried to settle into the calm after the storm, life had a way of throwing her curveballs that she wasn't prepared for. The email from Rachel had opened the door to healing, but it was a door that led to new challenges, both in her personal life and in the larger world around her. It was late Tuesday morning when Amara's phone buzzed with an alert. The message wasn't from a friend or a family member, it was a news notification. Her heart sank when she saw the headline. FAA administrator's daughter arrested at airport over false allegations. Amara blinked, the words in front of her blurring as she processed the message. Her breath caught in her throat, her hands trembling slightly as she clicked on the article. She read through the short snippet of text, which confirmed what she feared. The story was about an incident at an airport, where a young black woman, described as the daughter of a high-ranking FAA official, had been detained by airport security after a misunderstanding with a pilot. The pilot had allegedly called the police, claiming the woman had been behaving suspiciously. The arrest was later found to be based on racial profiling, but the damage had already been done. Amara stared at the screen, the words spinning in her mind. She felt the weight of the article like a physical blow. Her father, Michael, was a well-known figure in the FAA. She had spent her entire life trying to avoid the spotlight, yet here it was, thrust upon her. Her name, her identity, her personal life, suddenly all of it was in the headlines. The phone in her hand buzzed again. This time, it was her father's name flashing on the screen. Amara hesitated, taking a deep breath before answering. Amara, her father's voice came through the line, his tone calm but laced with an unmistakable urgency. "I'm sure you've seen the news." "I've seen it," she replied, her voice steady, though her insides churned with anxiety. "We need to talk," he said. "Meet me at the office as soon as you can." Amara didn't respond immediately. The thought of meeting her father at work, the place where he held such immense power, the place where every decision was scrutinized and dissected, felt suffocating. But she didn't have a choice. She couldn't run from this. Not now. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said finally, her voice quieter. When Amara arrived at the FAA headquarters, the energy in the building was noticeably tense. The usual hum of activity was replaced by hushed voices and the occasional sound of hurried footsteps. It was clear that the news had already set off a firestorm. As Amara walked down the sleek, modern halls of the FAA building, she could feel the weight of the eyes on her. It was as though she were walking through a gauntlet of whispers, each step heavier than the last. She reached her father's office, and without knocking, she stepped inside. Michael was standing by the large window, looking out at the city skyline. His posture was stiff, his face drawn. As soon as he saw her, he turned, his expression tight with concern. "Amara," he said, his voice soft but carrying a note of authority. "You're okay?" "I'm fine," Amara replied quickly, though she couldn't help the knot of unease that twisted in her stomach. "But I'm guessing you're not." Her father let out a sigh, sitting down behind his massive desk. This is a nightmare. I never wanted this for you. We've worked so hard to keep things under control, but this situation is different." Amara crossed her arms, taking a seat across from him. "So, what now? What happens to me? To you?" Michael ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. Right now, we need to focus on damage control. There are calls coming in from the media, from every corner. And I need to make sure this doesn't spiral into something bigger. The last thing I want is for this to be used as a way to attack the FAA, to discredit everything I've worked for. Amara's heart sank. She had expected this kind of response. For years, she had seen her father make decisions with an eye on his career, on the bigger picture. But this time, it was her name, her future, that was being compromised. "You're worried about your career," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "But what about me? What about how I'm being treated? How I'm being torn apart in the media?" Her father's eyes softened, but there was a hardness there too, a mixture of guilt and defensiveness. "This is a racial issue, Amara. And as much as I hate to admit it, the world is going to judge us, by the color of our skin, no matter what we do. We're already seen as part of the system. But that doesn't mean we let them tear us down without a fight. Why didn't you teach me how to fight this, then?" Amara's voice cracked, her frustration breaking through. "Why didn't you teach me how to face this kind of stuff without being afraid of the consequences?" Her father looked taken aback by the accusation, his expression shifting between anger and regret. "Amara, I didn't want this life for you. I thought I could shield you from it. But the truth is, the world's never been kind to people who look like us. I should have prepared you for that." The silence that followed felt heavy and suffocating. Amara could feel her frustration bubbling up, but she swallowed it down. She had spent so long holding her tongue, being the quiet daughter, the dutiful child. But she couldn't do that anymore. "I need to make this right," she said, her voice steady but resolute. "I'm not going to let this be another story where we sit back and let the media control it. I need to speak for myself, and I need to make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else. This is my fight now." Her father's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and admiration crossing his face. He hadn't expected her to respond this way, not so forcefully, not with so much conviction. "Amara. I'm not asking for your approval," she said. "I'm asking for your support. We can fix this. But I'm going to do it my way." Michael sat back in his chair, clearly stunned, as Amara stood up and turned to leave. Before she walked out the door, she paused and turned back to face him. "This is my life, Dad. I don't care about the politics. I care about what's right." As she left the office, a strange sense of clarity washed over her. She didn't know what would happen next or how she would navigate this new battle, but for the first time, she knew she had the power to shape her own destiny. And she was ready to fight for it. The world outside the glass walls of the FAA headquarters seemed to hum with the noise of the city, but to Amara, everything felt quieter. This wasn't just about the airport incident. It was about her reclaiming her voice, her power. It was about no longer letting the world define her. And, for the first time in a long while, Amara felt a sense of purpose that was stronger than any fear or doubt. This was just the beginning of her journey. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and media attention. Amara had never imagined that one phone call, one misunderstanding at an airport, could spark such an outcry. The news was everywhere, social media, newspapers, TV stations, everyone had an opinion on what had happened. Some supported her. Others called it an unfortunate but isolated incident. But the majority? They saw it as a textbook case of racial profiling. Amara had become a symbol of something much bigger than herself. The conversation surrounding her situation soon expanded beyond her personal experience. It was no longer just about the wrongful arrest, it was about systemic racism, prejudice, and the way black people were treated in the world, particularly in spaces where power and authority were at play. Amara's father had advised her to stay quiet. "Let the lawyers handle it," he had said. "Don't engage with the media." But Amara knew that silence wasn't going to help. She wasn't going to be a passive victim in her own story. If this was going to be her fight, she would take control of the narrative. The phone call from Rachel came in the middle of the chaos. Amara had been sitting in her apartment, staring at the stack of paperwork and media requests that had accumulated over the past few days. She hadn't had time to rest or even think. She had a meeting with her father later that afternoon, and the pressure of it all was starting to suffocate her. Rachel's voice on the other end was calm but urgent. "Amara, I've been thinking about everything, and I know this sounds crazy, but I think I can help. You need to do something that gets people's attention. Something that makes them listen." Amara was quiet for a moment, taken aback by the suddenness of the call. "What do you mean?" she asked, not sure if she even wanted to hear the answer. "I mean, this is bigger than just your case. It's about all the cases like it, about the system that keeps people like us in check. You've got a platform now, whether you wanted it or not. You can use it to make a difference." Amara leaned back in her chair, staring out the window. "I don't know. Everything feels so out of control. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to be anyone's example of racial injustice." Rachel's voice softened, but it was firm. "But you are. You're already a symbol, whether you like it or not. The question is, are you going to let others define you? Or are you going to stand up and show them who you really are?" The words hit Amara harder than she expected. Rachel was right, in a way. She didn't have control over what had happened. But she did have control over how she responded. Amara closed her eyes, letting the weight of Rachel's words sink in. She wasn't going to be silenced, not anymore. "You're right," she finally said. "Let's do this. I'm ready to take a stand." The following days were a blur of planning and strategizing. Rachel, with her background in advocacy work, took the lead on organizing a press conference. They weren't going to wait for the media to come to them. Amara was going to take charge of her story. Her father, though hesitant, reluctantly agreed to support her. "Just make sure this doesn't escalate," he warned. "It's going to be hard for me to protect you if you go too far." Amara nodded, but she knew that this wasn't about protection anymore. It was about justice, about showing the world that she would not allow her story to be used as a pawn in some larger political game. When the day of the press conference arrived, Amara was nervous, but she was also ready. She had spent hours practicing her speech, going over the points she wanted to make. She wanted her message to be clear. This wasn't just about her, it was about all the people who had been wronged by a system that didn't care about their lives. Rachel was with her every step of the way, helping her prepare for the onslaught of reporters and questions. "Stay focused," she reminded Amara. "This isn't just about responding to the questions they ask. It's about staying true to your story." Amara nodded. She was about to make a statement that would change everything. The press conference was held in a small conference room, the air heavy with tension. As Amara walked into the room, the flashing lights of the cameras hit her, the reporters' voices rising in a cacophony of questions. For a moment, it felt like everything was spinning out of control. She took a deep breath, stepped up to the podium, and looked out at the sea of faces before her. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady but carrying a weight that was felt by everyone in the room. "I'm here today to speak for myself, for the truth, and for the many people who have suffered because of a broken system." She paused, glancing down at the notes she had prepared, but she didn't need them. This wasn't about reading from a script. This was about her, her truth, and her desire for change. The incident at the airport was a moment of injustice. It was a moment of pain. But it's not just my pain. It's the pain of countless others who have been targeted, harassed, and arrested simply because of the color of their skin, she continued, her eyes scanning the room. And I'm not going to stay silent about it. I'm not going to pretend that everything is fine, that it's just a one-off incident. The room was completely silent now, all eyes on her. Amara could feel the weight of their attention, but she didn't let it stop her. This is about racial profiling. It's about the police, the pilots, and the systems that enable these injustices to continue. But it's also about accountability. It's about making sure that this doesn't happen again, to me or to anyone else. She paused again, her heart pounding in her chest. She was saying the things she had been too afraid to say before. I'm not just the daughter of an FAA administrator. I am a black woman. I am a person, and my life matters. And until the world learns to see us all as human, as worthy of respect, this fight is far from over. The reporters began to murmur, their pens moving furiously as they took notes. Amara knew this was just the beginning. There would be backlash, there would be fights, but in this moment, she had reclaimed her voice. As the press conference ended and the room began to empty, Amara felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She had done it. She had stepped out of the shadows of fear and doubt and claimed her space in the conversation. She looked at Rachel, who stood beside her, offering a proud smile. "You did it," Rachel said, her voice full of admiration. Amara smiled back, feeling a rush of pride. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was finally on the path she was meant to be on. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about a movement. A movement that would echo long after the press conference had ended. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind. Amara had expected to face some form of backlash, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the storm that hit. The media exploded with reactions, some in her favor, others against her. Her story had gone viral, but not all the attention was positive. The first wave came in the form of online criticism. Social media was flooded with comments, some supportive, others condemning her for what they perceived as playing the race card. There were accusations that she was exaggerating the situation, that she had made a mountain out of a molehill. People argued that the pilot had just been doing his job, and they questioned her decision to speak out so publicly. But it wasn't just the faceless keyboard warriors that worried her. The more disturbing backlash came from within her own circle, people she had once considered allies. Colleagues at the FAA who had once been friendly toward her now avoided eye contact in the halls. They were either too polite to confront her directly or too uncomfortable to offer her any support. Her father, too, was feeling the heat. He was constantly on the phone with colleagues, trying to manage the fallout from the press conference. The media wasn't just interested in Amara's story, they wanted to know how Michael was handling it. Was he supportive of his daughter's actions? Was he distancing himself from the controversy? Amara didn't need to ask. She knew the answer. Her father, always the political operator, was carefully weighing his options. He had always made decisions based on what was best for his career, and this situation was no different. He had given her his public support, but privately, he made it clear that he didn't agree with her approach. When Amara confronted him about it, the conversation was tense. "Amara," her father had said, pacing in his office. "I don't agree with the way you handled this. You're making a spectacle out of something that could have been resolved quietly. You're dragging the FAA into this." "But it wasn't about the FAA, Dad," Amara shot back, her voice tight with frustration. "It was about me. About the way I was treated. You don't understand. The press, the public, they don't care about your personal feelings. This is about the bigger picture. The FAA is under scrutiny right now. Every decision I make is being questioned." Amara's stomach twisted. She had known her father had always chosen his career over personal matters, but hearing him say it so bluntly hurt more than she had expected. "You can't keep hiding behind that," she replied, her voice shaking with emotion. "You can't keep pretending that everything is fine, and that we're not part of the problem." Her father's face hardened. "You don't get it, Amara. I'm doing this to protect you, to protect both of us. You're not just my daughter. You're a target now. And you need to be careful." "I don't need your protection, Dad," she said quietly, stepping back from him. "I need you to stand with me. This isn't just your battle. It's mine." Despite the tension with her father, Amara didn't back down. She kept pushing forward, using every interview and every social media post to amplify her message. She wasn't going to let her father's political maneuvering or the backlash from her colleagues silence her. She believed too strongly in what she was fighting for. And then came the phone call. It was late in the evening when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She answered it, still caught up in the aftershocks of a long day. "Amara, it's Rachel. We've got a situation." Amara's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" "There's a smear campaign brewing," Rachel said, her voice steady but urgent. "Someone's trying to discredit you, to make you look like a liar." Amara felt a cold dread settle over her. "What do you mean? How?" "They're digging into your past, trying to find anything they can to use against you. Photos, old social media posts, anything. They're trying to paint you as someone who's just out to cause trouble." Amara leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. "Who's behind it?" "I don't know yet, but it's clear someone with power is pulling the strings," Rachel replied. "This is bigger than just some random trolls. They're going after your credibility." Amara felt the knot tighten in her stomach. She had expected some resistance, but this was different. This was a full-fledged attack. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to discredit her, they were trying to destroy her. The next few days were filled with sleepless nights and frantic phone calls. Rachel worked behind the scenes to uncover who was orchestrating the smear campaign. Meanwhile, Amara's father was increasingly distant, preoccupied with the growing pressure from his own colleagues. It seemed like the world was closing in on her from all sides. Despite the relentless criticism, Amara refused to back down. She took to social media to address the growing attacks against her. She knew that defending herself publicly was risky, but she had nothing to hide. She shared her truth, posting old photos of herself with her friends and family, showcasing the love and support that had shaped her life. She wasn't going to let her past be twisted into something ugly. One night, after a particularly grueling round of media interviews, Amara sat in her apartment, scrolling through her phone. She noticed a comment on one of her recent posts, a long thread of hateful messages, but one message stood out. "I don't know you, but I've been following your story. You're not alone. We're with you." The comment was from someone named Elijah. It wasn't the first time she'd received messages of support from strangers, but something about this one hit her differently. Elijah was someone who had been through a similar experience, racial profiling, systemic injustice, and the emotional toll it took. He shared his story with her, and in his words, she found a reflection of her own. For the first time in days, Amara felt a spark of hope. She wasn't fighting alone. She had a community of people who had her back, people who understood her pain and her fight. The next morning, she received a call from Rachel. "I found something," she said, her voice full of determination. "I think I know who's behind the smear campaign." Amara's heart raced. "Who?" "It's not just some anonymous trolls. Someone at the FAA is leaking information about you to the press. They're using your past to discredit you. It's internal." Amara felt a wave of nausea rise in her chest. "You're telling me, someone at my father's office is doing this?" "Yeah," Rachel confirmed. "And I have proof." Amara's thoughts raced. If her own father's colleagues were behind this, it would change everything. But at the same time, she knew that she couldn't back down now. She had a mission. She had a purpose. And no smear campaign, no matter how well-funded or malicious, was going to stop her. This was only the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following Rachel's discovery felt like they were stretched into eternity. Amara's mind spun with thoughts about who could be behind the smear campaign. She didn't want to believe it was someone within her father's circle, someone she had trusted, but the evidence Rachel had uncovered was damning. The leaks were coming from somewhere high up within the FAA, and it seemed like they were working overtime to undermine her at every turn. Amara's father had always been a man of power, a man who knew how to navigate Washington's political maze. She had grown up watching him juggle relationships, mend rifts, and make deals behind closed doors. But she had also grown up knowing that with that power came a certain coldness, a willingness to do what was necessary to protect his position. She never imagined that his allies, the very people he had spent years building relationships with, would be the ones to turn on her. Yet, here she was, staring down the reality that someone in her father's world was using her to settle some sort of political score. The idea twisted her stomach in knots. As the week passed, the pressure only grew. Media outlets were relentless. They picked apart her life, analyzing every word she had said in the press conference, interpreting her actions through a lens of suspicion. Public opinion was divided. Some people still supported her, seeing her as a hero for standing up against a broken system. But others painted her as an opportunist, as someone who was playing the race card for personal gain. Despite everything, Amara remained resolute. She wasn't going to let them win. But the hardest part was still to come, confronting her father. That afternoon, Amara sat in her father's office, a heavy silence between them. She had decided that it was time to confront him directly, to ask him the questions that had been gnawing at her for days. Her father looked up from the stack of papers in front of him and gave her a tired smile. "Amara, I've been trying to reach you. There's been a lot of talk going around, and I need to make sure you're handling things carefully." Amara stood up, her arms crossed in front of her. "Carefully? Dad, this isn't about being careful anymore. Someone in your circle is trying to destroy me. I need to know if you're behind it." Her father's face froze. For a moment, he looked at her like he didn't recognize her. Then, his expression hardened. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the leaks," Amara said, her voice steady but full of fire. "I know someone from the FAA is leaking information to the press to discredit me. Is it you? Is it your colleagues?" Her father's eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe, or fear, but he quickly masked it. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "Amara, you have to understand, this isn't just about you anymore. This is about the FAA. About our reputation. About protecting the system we've built." Amara's heart pounded. "So you admit it. You're willing to sacrifice me to protect your position. To protect the FAA's image." Her father's jaw tightened. "I'm not sacrificing you. I'm trying to protect you. I've been trying to do that your entire life. But you need to understand that your actions, what you did at that press conference, it's causing a ripple effect. And not just here. It's causing problems at the highest levels of government. You're making enemies, Amara." Her eyes burned with anger. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be a symbol. But now that I am, you want me to stay quiet, to let it all slide. You want me to play nice while they rip me apart. But I won't." She took a step closer to him, feeling her emotions surge. "You taught me to fight. To stand up for what's right. Well, this is me standing up. And if you can't stand with me, then I'll do it alone." For a long moment, there was silence between them. Her father's eyes softened, but only just. "You don't understand," he said, his voice quieter now. "I've worked my entire life to get where I am. This isn't just about you or me. It's about everything I've built. Everything we've worked for." Amara's voice was raw with emotion. "I'm not a pawn in your game, Dad. I'm your daughter. And I need you to support me, not just in public, but behind the scenes, too. Otherwise, I can't keep fighting for something that you don't even believe in." Her father looked at her for a long time, the weight of the conversation sinking in. Finally, he exhaled sharply, as if defeated. "You're right. I can't protect you if you don't believe in the fight. But I've been doing my best to keep you safe in this world. That's why I've kept my distance. Amara's heart sank, the pain of betrayal cutting deeper than she anticipated. I don't want your protection anymore. I want your support. If you can't give that to me, then I'll find another way. Her father's face darkened, but there was something in his eyes, something that told Amara that, deep down, he understood. Later that evening, Amara sat in her apartment, staring out the window at the city lights. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was a message from Rachel. We've got some good news. I found out who's behind the leaks. It's not just any FAA insider. It's a high-ranking official who's tied to someone very powerful in the government. And I've got the proof we need. Amara's heart raced. The news was exactly what she had been waiting for, but it was also terrifying. If they went public with this information, it could destroy everything her father had worked for. But in that moment, Amara realized something important: her fight wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had been oppressed, for every person who had been pushed to the margins. If she didn't speak out, if she didn't stand up and fight, who would? She typed a response to Rachel. Get the proof ready. I'm not backing down. As the night grew darker, Amara knew that her journey was far from over. She had a long road ahead of her, filled with obstacles and enemies, but for the first time in days, she felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't fighting alone anymore. And no matter what happened next, she was going to see this through to the end. The battle was just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of preparations, strategies, and mounting pressure. Amara's phone seemed to never stop ringing, each call more urgent than the last. Rachel was working tirelessly to get the proof they needed, and every conversation they had was filled with tense anticipation. The leaks from within the FAA were more than just a scandal, they were an all-out assault on her character, her integrity, and her fight for justice. As the leaks grew more damaging, Amara began to realize the magnitude of the battle she was facing. Her father's colleagues were doing everything they could to undermine her, using their position within the FAA to manipulate the narrative and turn public opinion against her. But Amara wasn't about to let them win. She knew that revealing the truth, exposing the person behind the leaks, was the key to turning the tide. But the deeper she dug into the investigation, the more dangerous the situation became. Whoever was pulling the strings behind the scenes wasn't just a disgruntled FAA employee, they were part of a larger, more powerful network. Rachel had discovered that the leaks were being orchestrated by someone connected to a high-ranking government official. This person had the power to destroy her, to ruin her reputation and make sure that she was silenced forever. And as Amara learned more about who was involved, the realization hit her hard: if she was going to expose this corruption, she couldn't do it alone. She needed to bring in more allies, people who had the means and the influence to fight back. The phone call came late one night. It was Rachel, and her voice was laced with excitement. I've got it. We've got the proof, Rachel said. We know who's behind the leaks, and we know how far it goes. This is bigger than we thought. Amara's pulse quickened. Who? Who is it? His name is Gregory Sinclair. He's the deputy administrator of the FAA, Rachel explained. He's been leaking information to a reporter named Jeff Parker, who works for a major news outlet. The story they've been building is meant to destroy you. But there's more. Sinclair has ties to some very powerful people in Washington, people with a vested interest in making sure you don't succeed. Amara sat down on the couch, her mind racing. Sinclair, he's close to my father. I've met him before. Rachel's voice was grim. That's the thing, Amara. Sinclair is playing both sides. He's been trying to undermine your father for years, and now, he's using you as a pawn in his game. If you expose him, it's not just Sinclair you'll be going after. You'll be going after the entire network he's built. And they won't go down without a fight. Amara felt a surge of anger flood through her. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everything she had fought for, about all the people who had been silenced for far too long. This was her chance to take them down, to expose the corruption that had festered within the FAA and the government. "Where do we go from here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. "We go public," Rachel replied. "We release everything, Sinclair's involvement, the ties to the government officials, the reporter who's been helping him. We give it to the media, to everyone. We don't let them bury this." Amara took a deep breath, knowing that this was the moment she had been waiting for. It was time to stop running, to stop playing by their rules. She had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Amara and Rachel worked tirelessly to gather every piece of evidence, every email, every phone record, and every document that could prove Sinclair's involvement. It was clear that they had the ammunition they needed to take him down, but they still needed to be careful. One wrong move, one misstep, and the entire operation could collapse. Amara's father had tried to reach her multiple times, but she ignored his calls. She couldn't afford to get distracted. Her mission had grown far beyond her personal feelings. This wasn't just about confronting him anymore, it was about confronting the system itself, the forces that had allowed this kind of abuse and manipulation to continue unchecked. She couldn't afford to let him talk her out of it. Not this time. The day they decided to go public, Amara stood in front of the camera, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment when everything would change. Rachel was by her side, her eyes focused and determined. They had rehearsed everything, gone over every detail, but nothing could have prepared Amara for the weight of the decision she was about to make. She took a deep breath, looking into the lens. "My name is Amara Mitchell. And for the past few weeks, I've been the target of a smear campaign designed to discredit me, to silence me, and to destroy my credibility. The people behind this campaign don't just want to ruin me, they want to protect the corrupt system that allows this kind of injustice to flourish. But today, I'm here to expose the truth." Her voice was steady as she continued, detailing the information that Rachel had uncovered, laying out the connections between Gregory Sinclair, the government officials, and the media outlet that had been helping them. "They thought they could break me," Amara said, her voice rising with emotion. "But I won't be silenced. Not anymore." As she finished the statement, she handed over the evidence, digital files, email exchanges, and phone records, to the reporters waiting in the room. The media buzzed with excitement as the story went live, the truth finally coming to light. The aftermath was immediate and explosive. The media picked up the story quickly, and soon, Sinclair's name was being dragged through the mud. News outlets began reporting on his ties to powerful political figures and the way he had used his position to manipulate the FAA for personal gain. The backlash against Sinclair was swift, and it didn't take long before calls for his resignation began pouring in from every corner of the country. Amara watched as the news coverage unfolded, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and fear. She had done it. She had taken down one of the most powerful men in the FAA. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Her father's reaction was predictable. He called her immediately after the story broke, his voice tight with anger. "Amara, you've made a huge mistake," he said, his words sharp and cold. "This is going to destroy everything I've worked for. You've put us all in danger." Amara clenched her jaw, her resolve hardening. "No, Dad. You're the one who's been protecting the wrong people. This isn't about protecting your career anymore. It's about doing what's right." "I warned you," her father replied, his voice distant. "You don't know what you've just unleashed." Amara hung up, her fingers trembling slightly as she put the phone down. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. She had taken a stand. She had exposed the truth. And there was no going back now. The days that followed the public release of the leaked documents were a whirlwind. The media storm that erupted was unlike anything Amara had ever imagined. Sinclair's name was everywhere. Every major news outlet reported on his ties to corrupt government officials, his involvement in the smear campaign, and his attempts to undermine her at every turn. But as Sinclair's reputation crumbled, Amara found herself facing a new set of challenges. Despite the massive public backlash against Sinclair, Amara had become the center of attention. Everyone was talking about her, some in support, others in fierce opposition. She had become a symbol of resistance, a beacon of justice for many, but also a lightning rod for criticism. Her name was being dragged through the mud just as Sinclair's had been, but for entirely different reasons. There were those who accused her of ruining a man's career and jeopardizing the FAA's integrity. There were political pundits who claimed that she had manipulated the media for her own gain, using her race to stir up division. It was all a carefully calculated smear campaign, and Amara felt like she was right back where she started, fighting for her name, for her credibility. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers, a half-empty cup of coffee by her side. The weight of the world felt like it was bearing down on her. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from allies and detractors alike, some offering support, others seeking to tear her down. But the most troubling of all were the calls from her father. He had tried to reach her multiple times since the leak. Each time, she ignored him. She couldn't bear to speak to him right now, not when it felt like he had chosen his loyalty to the system over her. But part of her still wanted to understand why he had distanced himself from her during all of this. How could he have known all the while that this was happening and not spoken up? Amara had always admired her father. He had been her rock, her protector, the man who had taught her to be strong and to fight for what was right. But now, with everything unraveling, she wasn't sure where his loyalties lay. And that was the hardest part of this entire ordeal, the realization that the man she had trusted most had let her down. The tension between her father and her was palpable, but the pressure to keep pushing forward remained unrelenting. Amara knew that she couldn't just sit back and let the situation blow over. She had to keep fighting, keep digging, and make sure that the truth continued to surface. She had already contacted Rachel about next steps. The next phase of their plan was to get the full scope of Sinclair's network, find out who else was involved, who else might be pulling strings behind the scenes. Rachel had a few leads, but they needed to be careful. There were people in the FAA and in Washington who would stop at nothing to silence them. "I've got some information for you," Rachel said, her voice crackling with urgency over the phone. "There's more. We're not even scratching the surface yet." Amara's pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What did you find?" "There's a whole other layer to this thing," Rachel explained. "Sinclair was just the tip of the iceberg. He's part of a larger faction, people who are involved in shady dealings with private companies, lobbying groups, and even foreign governments. They've been manipulating the system for years, and now we've got proof of it." Amara leaned forward, her heart racing. "So, what do we do with it? We've already put Sinclair out in the open." "Exactly," Rachel said. "But Sinclair was only a small player in this whole scheme. We have to take down the people pulling the strings. We've got evidence now, enough to start a whole new investigation. We could expose them all, but we need to be strategic. We can't just throw everything out there." Amara nodded, the weight of the decision pressing on her. She knew this was more than just a personal fight. It was bigger than Sinclair, bigger than her father, bigger than the FAA. This was about the corruption that had been festering in the system for years. If they exposed it all, it could bring down an entire network of powerful people who had been manipulating the system for their own gain. That night, after hours of strategizing with Rachel, Amara sat alone in her apartment. The city was quiet, but her mind was racing. She kept replaying everything that had happened, the press conference, the leaks, her confrontation with her father. It all felt like a dream, a whirlwind of chaos that had thrown her life off course. But one thing was certain, she couldn't back down now. The doorbell rang, breaking her thoughts. It was late, and she wasn't expecting anyone. She opened the door cautiously, and to her surprise, standing there was her father. "Amara, we need to talk," he said, his voice low, but not angry, just tired. She stared at him for a long moment, unsure of what to say. Her father had always been a pillar of strength, but now he seemed smaller somehow, as if the weight of everything that had happened was starting to bear down on him too. You shouldn't have gone public with it, he continued. You've made a mess of everything. I warned you about the consequences, Amara. You don't know what you're up against. Don't lecture me, Dad, Amara replied, her voice edged with frustration. You knew this was happening. You knew about the leaks, about Sinclair, about all of it. And you stayed quiet. Her father flinched as if her words had struck him in the chest. I didn't stay quiet because I didn't care. I stayed quiet because I had to. I'm trying to protect you. Protect us. Protect us. Amara's voice broke. You didn't protect me, Dad. You let me fight this battle alone. You let them use me as their pawn. I thought you believed in what I was doing. He looked at her, his face etched with regret. I do believe in you. But this is bigger than you and me. There are people out there with power we can't even begin to understand. If we expose them, they'll come for us. They'll stop at nothing. I'm not afraid of them, Amara said, standing up straighter. You taught me not to be. Her father hesitated, then sighed. I'm sorry, Amara. I should have done more. But it's not too late to fix this. Let me help you. We can work together, get ahead of this. Amara's eyes narrowed. No, Dad. I'm doing this my way. I don't need you to protect me anymore. I'm going to take them down, and I'm going to do it without you if I have to. For a moment, her father didn't respond. Then, in a quieter voice, he said, I know you're strong, Amara. I never wanted you to lose yourself in this fight. Amara shook her head. I haven't lost myself, Dad. But I can't keep living in the shadows of your world. I have to fight for something bigger than this. Her father stood still for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Finally, he spoke again. Then I guess it's your fight now. Just promise me one thing, be careful. Don't let them tear you apart. Amara looked at her father for a long time, then nodded, her heart heavy. I will. But I'm doing this, no matter the cost. As her father turned to leave, Amara felt a strange sense of finality settle in her chest. This wasn't just a fight for her career, for her reputation, or even for her father's approval. This was a fight for the truth, and nothing would stop her from winning. Amara's father left her apartment that night with an uneasy silence hanging between them. He had warned her about the dangers of continuing this fight, but Amara had already made up her mind. She had come too far to back down now. She stood by the window, watching as the city lights flickered in the distance, her thoughts running a mile a minute. The world around her had shifted in a way she hadn't expected. The battle she had fought was no longer just about her and her father, it was about taking down an entire network of corruption that reached deeper than she had ever realized. She couldn't stop now. She wouldn't stop. The next day, Rachel called her with more information. Amara was at her desk, poring over the documents that had been released to the press when Rachel's voice crackled through the speakerphone. We've got more, Rachel said, urgency in her tone. I just got off the phone with a source inside the FAA. There's more we don't know, Amara. We need to dig deeper. Sinclair wasn't just working alone. There are high-ranking people who are helping him cover up his tracks. Amara rubbed her temples, feeling the weight of it all. Who else is involved, she asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew the answer. Someone from inside the White House. We don't have confirmation yet, but this is way bigger than we thought. Amara leaned back in her chair, staring at the wall as a wave of anxiety washed over her. She had known it wouldn't be easy, but this was more than she had bargained for. How do we move forward? Rachel was quiet for a moment before she spoke. We need to go after the people pulling the strings. Sinclair is just one part of the puzzle. There's someone higher up, someone who has the power to make all of this disappear. But we can't do it alone. We need allies. Amara nodded. I'll talk to the people we can trust. Let's make sure we get them first. Later that evening, Amara met with a small group of journalists she had come to trust during the investigation. They were a mix of independent reporters, a few from major outlets, and one or two from advocacy groups. Each of them had a piece of the puzzle, and they were willing to risk it all to see justice done. Sitting in a dimly lit conference room at a downtown cafe, Amara laid out the latest findings. We know Sinclair isn't the end of this, she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. The people behind this go all the way to the top. They've been manipulating the system for years, using their connections to cover up their crimes. The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. One reporter, a man named David from a popular national outlet, leaned forward. We've got to go public with everything, he said. If we expose this, there's no turning back. People will be watching. And if we're wrong, they'll come for us. Amara met his gaze, unflinching. I know what we're up against. But this isn't just about exposing Sinclair anymore. This is about cleaning up the system that's allowed corruption to run rampant. We've got to do this the right way. The journalists exchanged looks, each one silently grappling with the gravity of the decision they were about to make. Finally, Rachel spoke up, her voice calm but firm. We need to protect ourselves. We have to make sure that no matter what happens, we've covered our tracks. If we expose Sinclair, we have to be prepared for the backlash. But we can't back down. Amara nodded in agreement. I've already prepared everything. We've got the proof, and I'm going to make sure it's not just about Sinclair. This goes all the way to the top. That night, after the meeting, Amara sat alone in her apartment again, staring at her phone. The decision had been made. There was no turning back. But as she looked at the messages piling up, her heart skipped a beat when she saw an unfamiliar number. It was her father. She hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the screen, before she finally decided to answer. Amara, her father's voice came through, rough and tired. I've been thinking about what you said. I don't agree with how you're going about this, but I can't deny that you're right. This thing is bigger than we realized. She felt a strange pang in her chest as she listened to him speak. Her father, the man who had always seemed invincible, was finally admitting the truth. I'm not asking you to back down, he continued. But I need you to be careful. The people behind this won't hesitate to destroy everything you've built. I've seen it happen before. They play dirty. And when you go after them, they won't stop until they've crushed you. Amara's resolve solidified. I understand, Dad. But I can't stop. Not now. Her father sighed. I know. I never wanted you to have to carry this weight. But you're stronger than I gave you credit for. Amara's voice softened. I'm doing this for more than just me. This isn't just about taking down Sinclair. It's about cleaning up the whole system. I have to finish what I started. The silence stretched between them, but this time, it didn't feel like the silence of a rift. It felt like an understanding. Her father had been right to warn her, but now he was acknowledging that she was doing what had to be done. Just be careful, he repeated, his voice heavy. And remember, I'm here if you need me. She nodded, even though he couldn't see it. I will. Thanks, Dad. She hung up the phone and stared at it for a moment. There was still so much left to do. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of something bigger than she could have ever imagined. Maybe, just maybe, she could take them down and rebuild everything from the ground up. The next morning, Amara and her team of journalists met again, their strategy now set in motion. They would release a coordinated series of articles, interviews, and exclusive reports, each one peeling back the layers of the corruption that had been hidden for so long. But Amara knew this wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about fighting a system that was built on secrecy and lies. And if they were going to win, they would need everything they had, and then some. As Amara watched the reporters prepare for the first story to go live, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what was about to happen. But she also felt something else, a sense of power. For the first time, she was in control. She had the truth, and no matter how hard they fought back, they couldn't erase it. It was time for the world to see what had been hidden in the shadows for far too long. Amara's phone buzzed relentlessly as the first article went live. It was only the beginning, but already the floodgates had opened. The public's response was swift and fierce, some applauding her bravery, while others branded her a troublemaker. The media coverage was non-stop, with outlets from all over the country and even internationally picking up the story. The first wave of fallout was expected, but what came next was something far more insidious. Amara had just finished reading a batch of emails, when she heard a knock on the door. She stood up, her heart skipping a beat, uncertain of who it might be. She opened it cautiously to reveal a man in a suit, his expression businesslike but with a hint of concern. He introduced himself as a representative from the Department of Homeland Security. "Ms. Davis?" he asked, his voice firm but polite. "Yes," Amara said, feeling a knot form in her stomach. "What is this about?" The agent looked around the apartment as though sizing up the situation, then returned his gaze to her. "We have some questions regarding the documents you've leaked to the press. We need you to come with us for questioning." Amara's pulse raced. The legal ramifications of what she had done had just become very real. She had known there would be consequences, but she never imagined it would escalate so quickly. "I'm not going anywhere without a lawyer," Amara replied, her voice calm but steely. The agent's expression didn't change. "That's your right, of course. But we do need to speak to you, and I'd advise you to cooperate. The situation is delicate." Amara took a deep breath. "I will cooperate. But I'm not going anywhere without my attorney. I'll call them." The agent nodded, but the tension in the air was palpable. He didn't leave, but stood there as she made the call, his eyes never leaving her. 20 minutes later, Amara's lawyer, a woman named Lisa Montgomery, arrived at the apartment. She was a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for handling high-profile cases. "Is everything all right?" Lisa asked as she entered, glancing at the DHS agent. "I'm just here to ask a few questions, ma'am," the agent said, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Is this a formal interrogation?" Lisa asked, her tone professional but sharp. "Or are you just here to intimidate my client?" "We simply need her cooperation," the agent said, though his tone was now less confident. Lisa glanced at Amara, who nodded in silent agreement. "All right. We're happy to cooperate. But we'll be setting the terms. You don't get to walk in here and make demands without proper procedure." The agent hesitated for a moment, clearly weighing his options, before he finally relented. "Fine. But you'll be hearing from us again, Ms. Davis." With that, the agent turned on his heel and walked out, leaving Amara and Lisa alone in the apartment. Amara sank back into her chair, feeling the weight of everything she had just been through. "That was close," Lisa said, sitting across from her. "You were right to ask for a lawyer. They were trying to intimidate you." Amara ran a hand through her hair. "I knew they'd come for me eventually. But I didn't expect them to escalate things this quickly." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You're starting to hit some very sensitive nerves, Amara. This isn't just about Sinclair anymore. The people behind him aren't going to let you take them down without a fight." "I know," Amara said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "But I can't back down now. Too many people are depending on me." Lisa sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I get it. But you need to be careful. This isn't just a press battle anymore. They'll try to ruin you, and they'll use everything in their power to do so." Amara nodded, her mind racing. She couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. If she went down, so did the whole fight for justice she had built. She had to stay ahead of them, always one step ahead. As the hours passed, the pressure mounted. Amara knew she was at a crossroads. She had to continue pushing forward, but there was a gnawing fear in the back of her mind. What if she couldn't take them all down? What if she lost everything in the process? Her thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. It was Rachel. "Amara," Rachel said, her voice tense. "I've got something you need to see. It's about the person at the top, behind everything." Amara sat up straight, her heart pounding. "What do you mean? Who's behind this?" "There's someone we didn't expect," Rachel replied. "And it's someone we didn't know was involved. It's a bombshell, Amara." Amara stood up, pacing around the room. "Tell me who it is. What's going on?" Rachel hesitated. "It's your father." Amara froze, the phone slipping from her hand. The words echoed in her mind, but they didn't make sense. "What are you talking about?" "I'm sorry, Amara. I didn't want to say it like this, but we have proof," Rachel said. "Your father's been in on it from the beginning. He's one of the people pulling the strings. He's been covering up Sinclair's actions, all while keeping you in the dark." Amara's knees gave way, and she collapsed onto the couch, her mind spinning. It felt like the world was shattering all over again. Her father, the man who had always been her rock, her protector, was a part of the system she was fighting to destroy. "No," she whispered, her voice shaking. "No, it can't be true." "I'm afraid it is," Rachel said softly. "We've traced the connections. He's been using his position to protect Sinclair and the others, pushing your investigation in the wrong direction." Amara covered her face with her hands, trying to process the weight of this new revelation. How could she have been so blind? How had she not seen the signs? The one person she thought she could trust had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Later that night, Amara found herself sitting alone in her apartment, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. Her father's betrayal felt like a deep wound, one that she wasn't sure how to heal. She had to confront him. She had to hear the truth from his own lips. But the question gnawed at her: if he was behind it all, could she still trust him? Or was she simply another pawn in his game? One thing was clear: this fight had just gotten personal. The apartment was eerily quiet as Amara sat, her eyes fixed on the phone in her hand. The news Rachel had shared with her hung like a cloud in the room, suffocating her. Her father, the one person she thought she could rely on in a world full of uncertainty, had been involved in the very corruption she was trying to expose. How could he have kept something like this from her? How could he have betrayed her, and, more importantly, everyone she had been fighting for? Her phone vibrated again, snapping her out of her daze. It was a text message from Lisa. "Meet me tomorrow morning. We need to talk. I'm worried about the next steps." Amara's fingers hovered over the screen. She wasn't sure what to do next, torn between confronting her father or continuing her fight to expose the corruption. She had always known that the deeper she dug, the more dangerous it would become. But this was a level of betrayal that she hadn't anticipated. It shook her to the core. She took a deep breath, pushing aside the swirling emotions inside her. The fight wasn't over. She still had the truth on her side. But how could she use that truth if the very person she was trying to bring justice for was part of the system she was dismantling? The next morning, Amara walked into the small cafe where she had agreed to meet Lisa. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but she kept her posture straight and her gaze focused. Lisa was already there, waiting at a corner table, a grim look on her face. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Lisa said as Amara sat down. Amara's lips pressed into a thin line. "You don't know the half of it. I found out last night. My father, he's been involved in all of this." Lisa's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "What do you mean? Are you sure?" Amara nodded, her voice shaking slightly. Rachel found proof. My father has been covering for Sinclair and the others. He's been working to protect them while pretending to be on my side. All this time. I've been fighting for a cause that he's been sabotaging from the inside. Lisa was silent for a moment, processing the information. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Amara's face. This is a huge blow, Lisa said quietly. But you can't let it stop you. The fight doesn't change, Amara. If anything, this only makes it more urgent. Your father's betrayal doesn't erase the truth. It doesn't change the people you've been fighting for. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, forcing back the tears that threatened to spill. She knew Lisa was right, but the emotional weight was unbearable. How could she keep going when the person she had trusted most had turned on her? I don't know if I can do this anymore, Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. How do I confront him? What do I even say? Lisa placed a hand on her shoulder, her grip firm and reassuring. You confront him with the truth. You don't have to have all the answers right now. But don't let him keep you in the dark any longer. You deserve to know why he did this. You deserve to hear it from him. Amara nodded slowly, the weight of the decision looming over her. She knew she couldn't run from this. She had to face it, for her own peace of mind and for the sake of everything she had worked for. That afternoon, Amara made the call she had been dreading. Her father answered on the second ring, his voice gruff but familiar. Amara, he said, sounding surprised. What's going on? You okay? Her heart pounded in her chest. The words were stuck in her throat, but she had to say them. She had to confront him. Dad. I know everything, she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I know about Sinclair. I know about what you've been doing. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Amara could hear the tension building in his silence, the way his breathing became more shallow. Amara, listen, he began, but she cut him off. Don't. I need to hear it from you. I need to know why. Why, he echoed, his voice low. Because I had no choice. You don't understand, Amara. This isn't as simple as you think. You've been digging into things that you don't understand the consequences of. I've been fighting for justice, for the people who've been hurt by this system, Amara shot back, her voice rising in anger. How could you be a part of it? How could you, my own father, betray me like this? There was a long silence, and Amara felt a pit form in her stomach. It was the longest pause she had ever experienced with him. Finally, his voice broke through the stillness. I never wanted you to be part of this, Amara. I wanted to protect you. All I've done it to keep you safe. But now that you're involved, there's no turning back. The people at the top don't play by the rules. They'll come after you. They'll destroy everything you've built. Tears welled up in Amara's eyes, but she wiped them away before her father could hear. I don't care about my career or my safety. I care about doing what's right. You've been protecting them, people like Sinclair, while I've been trying to expose them. How could you? I did it to protect you, her father repeated. You don't get it. The people we're talking about, they don't care about anyone. They'll use you, discard you, and you'll never be able to get away. I didn't want that for you. Amara felt the anger in her chest swell to an unbearable level. You think I'm weak? You think I can't handle this? No, her father's voice was softer now. I think you're strong. But strength alone isn't enough in this game. I've seen people like us crushed before. I've seen how it ends. If you keep going, they'll destroy you, Amara. And I won't be able to stop it. The words were like a slap in the face. It was his way of saying he couldn't, or wouldn't, help her. It was a confession, but not of guilt. It was of someone who had chosen self-preservation over doing the right thing. Amara closed her eyes, shaking with emotion. I can't just walk away, Dad. I can't live with myself if I do. Her father's voice trembled for the first time. Amara, please. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I don't know if I can forgive you. But I'm going to do this my way. I'm not giving up. Before he could respond, she ended the call, dropping the phone onto the table. In the silence that followed, Amara realized that everything had changed. The battle she had been fighting was no longer just about Sinclair or the corruption she was trying to expose. It was personal now. She had no choice but to keep moving forward, no matter the cost. The stakes had never been higher. But neither had her resolve. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and late-night meetings. Amara barely slept, her thoughts constantly racing between the investigation and the lingering conversation with her father. She had confronted him, but she hadn't received the answers she needed. Instead, she had been left with even more questions, questions that no one else could answer but him. But right now, she had no choice but to keep moving forward. Every lead she chased, every new piece of evidence she uncovered, only seemed to make the situation more complex. Amara knew that Sinclair wasn't the only one involved in the conspiracy. There were others, higher up, pulling strings and keeping secrets buried beneath layers of corruption. But the deeper she dug, the more dangerous things became. The air was thick with tension as Amara prepared for her next move. She had to get closer to the core of the operation. And she had one last lead that might get her there. It came from Rachel, who had dug into the financial records linked to Sinclair and a few of his associates. Hidden in those records was a name, a person who could potentially unravel everything. But the clock was ticking. She glanced at her phone, reading the text Rachel had sent earlier. The next step is big. I found something that could take us straight to the heart of this. But we need to move fast. They'll know we're close. Amara's heart raced. She knew Rachel was right. The closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous things would become. But she couldn't stop now. She couldn't give up, not after everything she had sacrificed to get here. It was a cloudy morning when Amara met Rachel in the same cafe where they had talked the first time. This time, there was no optimism in the air, just the weight of what was at stake. Rachel didn't waste any time. As soon as Amara sat down, she slid a folder across the table. This is it, Rachel said, her voice low. Everything we need to bring Sinclair and his people down. Amara opened the folder carefully, flipping through the pages of financial statements and names of individuals who had been involved in shell companies, kickbacks, and illegal deals. And then there it was, the name that Rachel had hinted at, Jared Thompson, a high-ranking official in the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, whose signature appeared on several documents linked to Sinclair. Amara felt a chill run through her. This was bigger than she had anticipated. Jared Thompson's name wasn't just any name. He was one of the most powerful people in the FAA, with a reputation for being untouchable. But he was connected to Sinclair, and that meant he was part of the problem. Rachel leaned in, her voice barely a whisper. We need to bring him into the light, Amara. If we can tie him to the corruption, we can bring this whole thing down. Amara looked at the files again. It was a lot to take in, and the implications were staggering. Thompson's involvement meant that the FAA itself might be complicit in the corruption Amara had been investigating. Her thoughts immediately turned to her father. He worked for the FAA too, but at a much lower level. Was he in on this? Was he part of the conspiracy? She shook her head, trying to clear her mind. She couldn't think about that now. There was too much at stake. How do we get to Thompson? Amara asked, trying to focus on the task at hand. Rachel tapped her fingers on the table, her gaze fixed on the folder. We need leverage. Thompson is too powerful to go after directly. But there's a meeting happening next week, one where Sinclair and Thompson will both be present. It's high level, and it's about to happen under the radar. If we can get someone inside, we can gather the evidence we need. Amara felt a spark of determination. We need to infiltrate the meeting. Rachel nodded. Exactly. We don't have much time. If we're going to do this, we need to act fast. Once they realize we're onto them, it'll be too late. Amara and Rachel spent the next few days strategizing. They reached out to a few trusted allies, including a tech-savvy friend named Nate, who had the skills to help them gain access to secure areas and gather intelligence. Together, they formed a plan that involved infiltrating the meeting using a combination of hacking, surveillance, and a well-timed ruse. The plan was dangerous, but it was the only way. If they could get hard evidence linking Thompson, Sinclair, and others to the corruption, it would be the smoking gun they needed. But if anything went wrong, it could mean the end of the line for all of them. Amara spent hours reviewing the documents Rachel had found, memorizing every detail. She had to be prepared for anything. The night before the meeting, Amara stood in front of her bedroom mirror, staring at her reflection. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of calm. The plan was set. Tomorrow would be a turning point. She would either succeed in bringing these corrupt officials to justice, or she would lose everything. Her phone rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Lisa. Amara, we need to talk. It's important. Lisa's voice was tight, tinged with urgency. Amara frowned. What's going on? I just heard something, Lisa said. Your father, he's involved in the meeting tomorrow. Amara's stomach dropped. What? No. He can't be. I don't know how, but I'm hearing rumors. He might be the one arranging it. This whole thing, it's even bigger than we thought. Amara felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Her father. The man who had betrayed her. Was he involved in this? Was he a part of the conspiracy after all? She had to know for sure. Lisa, I have to go. I need to confront him, Amara said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Amara, wait, Lisa warned. Don't act impulsively. You can't afford to make a mistake now. But it was too late. Amara had already made up her mind. She couldn't keep ignoring the truth, not anymore. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the door, determined to find out the truth once and for all, no matter the cost. As Amara stepped out into the cold night, she realized the gravity of what she was about to do. Tomorrow would change everything. And the price of uncovering the truth might be higher than she had ever imagined. Amara's heart raced as she walked through the empty streets, her mind spinning with the unsettling revelation about her father. Every step felt heavier than the last, like gravity itself was conspiring to pull her back. But she couldn't turn back now. She had to confront him. She had to know the truth. The thought of her father being tangled in this web of lies and corruption sent waves of anger coursing through her veins. She had trusted him with everything. How had she not seen it? How had she been blind to the signs? She knew deep down that he had always tried to protect her in his own way, but now she wondered if his idea of protection had been nothing more than control. Amara's phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her spiraling thoughts. It was a message from Rachel, be careful. I just got word that there's been some movement in the system. They know we're coming. A chill ran down Amara's spine. She had been expecting this. No one could stay under the radar forever. But now it was clear that they weren't just dealing with the FAA or Sinclair anymore. This was bigger. Whoever was behind all this had their eyes on her, and they weren't going to let her walk away unscathed. She couldn't afford to be scared now. She had to press on. When Amara arrived at her father's apartment, the lights were on, casting a warm glow through the windows. She stood there for a moment, staring at the door as if it were a threshold into another world, one where the truth was buried, and where everything she thought she knew was now shattered. Taking a deep breath, Amara knocked on the door. There was no answer at first, and for a moment, she thought about leaving. But then the door creaked open, revealing her father standing in the doorway, a surprised expression on his face. Amara? His voice was low, and there was a hesitancy in his eyes, as if he had been expecting her, but not this. Not now. Dad, we need to talk, Amara said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. Her father's gaze shifted, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite place. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Come in, sweetheart. I'm glad you're here, but I'm sure this isn't a social visit. Amara stepped past him, her mind swirling with the questions that had haunted her for days. She could feel her pulse quicken as she took a seat, her father settling across from her, avoiding her eyes. She could tell he was nervous. Good. Why didn't you tell me, Dad? She asked, her voice a mixture of hurt and anger. Why didn't you tell me what you were really doing? He let out a heavy sigh, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of the world had just descended upon him. Amara, you have to understand. I never wanted you involved in this. You don't know what it's like at that level, the pressure, the deals. It's not just about us anymore. It's about everyone who depends on us. Amara's breath hitched. She wasn't sure if she was listening to a confession or a justification. Is that what you tell yourself every time you help people like Sinclair get away with it? You're not protecting anyone, Dad. You're hurting people. You're helping them destroy lives. Her father's face tightened, and for the first time, Amara saw a flicker of something unfamiliar in his eyes, guilt, maybe, but also something else. I didn't have a choice, he muttered. You don't understand. They've got leverage. They've got people everywhere. You think you're just going to waltz in and fix everything? It doesn't work like that. But I have to try, Amara said, her voice steady but firm. I can't sit by and let these people destroy everything. I know about Thompson, Dad. I know about Sinclair. You're part of this, whether you want to admit it or not. Her father's face paled. You don't know what you're getting into. You don't understand how deep this goes. They'll ruin you, Amara. They'll tear you apart, just like they've done to others. I've been trying to protect you. That's all I've ever done. Amara clenched her fists, her mind racing with everything he had just said. She could see the fear in his eyes, but it wasn't just fear for her, it was fear for himself. He had spent his life walking this tightrope, trying to keep her safe while remaining part of a system that was corrupt to its core. I'm not scared, Dad, Amara said, standing up. And I'm not walking away. I'm not going to let you drag me into your world of excuses and lies. I'm going to expose the truth. I'm going to take them down, starting with Sinclair. Her father stood up too, his hands trembling. Amara, don't do this. You don't understand the consequences. You think you're just going after Sinclair, but you're opening a door that can't be closed. I've seen what happens to people who go up against them. They don't just lose their careers. They lose their lives. Amara's heart pounded in her chest, and she felt the weight of his words sink in. But there was something deeper than fear in her. There was a determination that refused to be silenced, even by her own father. You're right, she said quietly. I don't know everything. But I know what's right. And I'm not backing down. Her father's eyes softened for a moment, as if he were on the verge of saying something important, something that could change everything. But then, with a look of resignation, he turned away, walking toward the window. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. I can't help you, Amara, he said, his voice low and hollow. But if you keep going down this path, just know one thing, I won't be able to protect you anymore. Amara felt a lump in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She knew what she had to do. She had already made the decision when she walked in here. The fight wasn't just about exposing Sinclair anymore. It was about reclaiming everything she had lost, her sense of justice, her hope, and, yes, her own father's betrayal. I understand, she said, her voice steady despite the heartbreak she felt. But I'll make it right, even if you won't. With that, Amara turned and walked out of the apartment, the door closing softly behind her. As she stepped into the cold night air, she felt a strange sense of clarity. The weight of her father's betrayal still lingered, but it no longer defined her. The path ahead was uncertain, and the stakes had never been higher. But Amara knew one thing for sure: she was ready to face whatever came next, no matter the cost. Amara's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway as she made her way down the stairwell of her father's building. Her mind was still reeling from their conversation. Each word he had said had hit her like a heavy blow, but it was his resignation that haunted her the most. He had given up. He had accepted the corruption. He had let fear dictate his choices, and that was the one thing Amara refused to do. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out quickly. It was a text from Rachel. Got the intel. The meeting is tomorrow. We're in. Amara's pulse quickened. The moment she had been preparing for was here. The plan to infiltrate the high-level meeting was about to unfold. It was their chance to gather the final evidence they needed. But with every step she took closer to the truth, the stakes grew higher. If she succeeded, she would expose Sinclair and his entire network. But if she failed, the consequences could be disastrous. She shoved her phone back into her pocket and hurried to her car. The sky above was darkening with heavy clouds, an omen she couldn't quite shake off. Maybe it was just the weight of everything pressing down on her, or maybe it was the growing feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. At Rachel's place, they gathered once again to finalize their plan. Nate had already started working on the security system surrounding the meeting location, hacking into the surveillance cameras and gaining access to the building's entry points. Rachel, ever the strategist, had put together a foolproof plan for how they would sneak in unnoticed. Amara could feel the urgency building in the room. It wasn't just about Sinclair anymore, it was about the entire corrupt system that had allowed people like him to thrive. The FAA, the powerful figures hidden behind the scenes, everything was connected. It was all coming to a head. "We've got one shot at this," Rachel said, her voice calm despite the tension in the air. "If we miss it, it's over. There's no going back." Amara nodded, trying to push the weight of her emotions aside. She had made peace with what she was doing. But that didn't make it any easier. She thought of her father again, of the man who had once been her hero, now standing on the wrong side of history. "I'm ready," Amara said, her voice firm. Nate gave her a grim look. "Just stay sharp. The people we're dealing with don't play fair." Amara's resolve hardened. She wasn't here to play fair. She was here to make things right. The next morning, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The meeting was set to take place in a high-security conference center, nestled in the heart of downtown. Amara, Rachel, and Nate made their way to the building under the cover of early morning traffic. They were dressed in business attire, unassuming, professional. It was the perfect disguise. They arrived at a discreet entrance, the kind only used by the VIPs of the organization. Nate had already disabled the cameras in the hallways, leaving them with only one task: get to the conference room without being seen. As they approached the door, Amara's heart raced. This was it. This was the moment they had been working toward. She could hear muffled voices from the other side, voices she recognized. Sinclair, Thompson, and a few others. Powerful people who had no idea they were about to be exposed. "Stay calm. Stick to the plan," Rachel whispered as she gave Amara a final nod. With a deep breath, Amara pushed the door open. Inside, the room was filled with a few key figures gathered around a sleek, oval conference table. The air was thick with a mix of tension and anticipation, the kind of atmosphere only a few could create, and Amara had walked right into it. No one noticed them at first. Amara, Rachel, and Nate slipped into the room, blending in with the group, as if they belonged. They were there to listen, to observe, to gather the last bit of evidence they needed. But then, just as Amara was about to move closer to the table, she felt a familiar presence, a weight on her chest. A sudden realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Her father was in the room. Amara froze, her heart leaping into her throat. There, standing at the head of the table, was her father. He was dressed in a sharp suit, the very image of power and authority. His eyes locked onto hers for a brief moment, and for an instant, time seemed to stop. In that fleeting second, Amara saw a flicker of recognition, then something deeper, guilt, regret, fear. Her father knew she was there. Amara's mind raced. She couldn't let this stop her. She couldn't back out now. But the knot in her stomach was growing, a feeling of betrayal that threatened to consume her. She had hoped, even believed, that her father would have been different, that he could somehow be the one to help her take down the corrupt system. But now it was clear, he was entrenched in it. She could see it now, the lines in his face, the subtle tension in his posture, as if he were balancing between two worlds. One that he had sworn to protect, and another that he had sold his soul to. Rachel must have sensed the shift in Amara's demeanor because she placed a hand on her arm. "Stay focused. We can't let him distract you." Amara nodded, taking in a deep breath. The plan was still in motion, and she couldn't afford to let her father throw her off course. She wasn't here to save him. She was here to bring down the whole system. The conversation around the table continued, and Amara's heart pounded as she slowly moved closer to the group. Sinclair and Thompson were deep in conversation, their voices low and guarded. But there was something in the air, an undercurrent of tension, that Amara couldn't ignore. Then she heard it. A name. Amara. Her father spoke her name quietly, and the room fell silent. Amara's head snapped toward him, her stomach sinking. He was looking at her with a mixture of fear and desperation. "This needs to end now, Amara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but loud enough for her to hear. Her father was warning her. But what did that mean? Was it a plea for help? Or was it a final warning that her pursuit of the truth was about to get her into more danger than she could handle? She didn't know. But she did know one thing, she had to keep going. There was no turning back now. The room felt suffocating, and Amara's heart pounded against her chest like a trapped animal. Her father's voice was a quiet tremor in the back of her mind. "This needs to end now, Amara." The weight of those words lingered, but she couldn't afford to let them control her. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to turn back now. Her eyes never left her father's face. He was still standing at the head of the table, his suit immaculate, his posture that of someone in control, yet there was something about him now that was different. Something shattered behind his eyes. The fear was clear, he was trying to protect her, but he was also trying to save himself. Amara's pulse quickened, and she stepped forward, closer to the table, careful not to give any sign that she wasn't part of the inner circle. Rachel and Nate were just a few paces behind her, blending in with the other attendees, but Amara's mind was focused entirely on the man at the front of the room. Her father. She had a choice to make. She could turn away, leave the room, and pretend this wasn't happening, pretend her father wasn't involved in the very corruption she was trying to expose. Or she could continue her mission, expose everything, and bring down Sinclair, Thompson, and everyone else involved. She could finally uncover the truth for good. The problem was, she wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her father's soul, for the family that she thought she knew, and for everything she had believed in. He wasn't just a figurehead anymore, he was her father, and the heartbreak of seeing him trapped in this world was almost more than she could bear. But the truth was stronger than the pain. Amara's eyes flickered back to the conference table. Sinclair was speaking now, his voice smooth and calculated, just as she remembered it. "We've got everything in place. No one will stop us. Not the press, not the law, and definitely not some kid with an agenda." He glanced briefly toward Amara, his eyes narrowing with a predator's instinct, and for a moment, it felt like the walls were closing in. That was all Amara needed. That moment of hesitation. She knew this was it. The time for subtlety was over. She didn't hesitate. She walked to the back of the room, where the security monitors were set up. The door was only a few steps away, but she knew this was where she needed to be. There was no turning back. She had to act fast. Now, she whispered under her breath, tapping her earpiece to make sure Nate and Rachel were ready. The seconds stretched into eternity. She could feel the tension building as Sinclair's words continued to drone on. Then, without warning, the power went out. A sudden, brutal blackout flooded the room in darkness. Amara's breath caught in her throat. Everything was happening so fast now. She didn't know if it was Rachel or Nate who had triggered the hack, but it didn't matter. This was their chance. In the chaos of the darkness, she moved. Swiftly, silently, she approached the back corner where Sinclair's laptop sat, the one that held all of the sensitive data, the final piece of the puzzle. If she could get to it, if she could download everything she needed, it would all be over. But she wasn't alone. A hand grabbed her wrist, stopping her dead in her tracks. She froze. Going somewhere, Amara? Her father's voice was cold, distant, his grip tightening on her arm. Her heart stopped for a beat. Dad. He cut her off. You don't know what you're doing. You can't just expose them like this. You think it's going to be easy? You think the truth will set us free? It'll destroy everything. His voice was a low, desperate hiss, barely audible over the rising panic in the room. Amara's eyes met his, searching for any sign that he might still care, any sign that the man she once trusted was still there. But what she saw was different. The man in front of her wasn't the father she had grown up with. He was someone she barely recognized, someone consumed by the same darkness that had taken hold of the very people she was fighting against. She yanked her arm free from his grasp, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. No, Dad. You don't understand. This isn't just about us anymore. You can't keep hiding behind your lies. I'm not letting you protect them anymore. I'm not letting you protect this. He hesitated, and for a moment, she saw the flicker of regret in his eyes again. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. You'll regret this, Amara, he said, his voice almost a whisper. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She turned on her heel and sprinted toward the laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as the room around her erupted in chaos. The backup power kicked in just as she completed the download, the screen lighting up with files, documents, emails, and recordings, all the evidence they needed to bring Sinclair and the others down. But as she grabbed the device, she felt a sharp pain at the base of her skull. Everything went black. Amara woke up to the sound of beeping machines. She could feel the coolness of metal beneath her, the faint scent of antiseptic in the air. Her head was pounding, and as she tried to move, she realized her wrists were strapped down. Panic surged through her, but then she remembered everything. Sinclair, her father, the download. Her eyes shot open, and she looked around. She was in a hospital room, but this wasn't a place she'd ever expected to end up. The door opened, and a familiar face stepped inside, Rachel. You're awake, Rachel said, her voice a mixture of relief and worry. You scared the hell out of me, Amara. Amara tried to speak, but her throat was dry. What happened? Rachel hesitated before answering. You were knocked out. They took you. Your father, I think he's involved in this more than you realize. Amara's heart sank. What about the files? Rachel pulled out her phone and showed Amara the screen. We've got everything. We're going public with it, Amara. The truth is out. Sinclair and the others, they're done. A feeling of triumph washed over Amara, but it was quickly tempered by the heavy weight of what had happened. Her father. The man who had always been her protector. She had fought for the truth, but at what cost? The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Amara had exposed the corruption, but her personal journey, her quest for forgiveness, for redemption, was just beginning. As she looked at Rachel, Amara knew that no matter what came next, she had made the right choice. The truth had been uncovered, and no one could hide from it anymore. The light at the end of the tunnel was closer than ever, but it was still far away. And in that moment, Amara realized she was ready to face whatever it took to get there. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?